Jerry Marzinski here. And he's got we got a bachelor's degree in psychology. We got a master's in counseling. We've got a licensed psychotherapist for a long period of time. And one of the most interesting part of your career was, I think, was your firsthand experience in the actual field trying to help people. Is that fair to say that that's
Well,
kind of
that'll
where?
work. Yeah, I've been at this for, over 40 years, working with psychiatrists, studying the voices that schizophrenics hear, that the psychiatric mafia insists are hallucinations, and they're not. Once you really start looking into them, they run very specific, very predictable patterns, and something like 23 of them, and I can go down them real quickly. They're, you know, y- anybody working in the field can see this for themselves. They don't need any highfalutin lab equipment or the where they psychiatry it wasn't psychiatry who came up with the chemical imbalance garbage. That was Eli Lilly back in the 70s when they came up with uh, the chemical imbalance theory, because they had no explanation for what the voices were or what caused them. They had no idea. They still have no idea. But so they keep from looking like fools. They had to make up some cause. So they started with mothers. They blamed it on mothers. Then they blamed it on genetics, and they couldn't find anything on genetics. They couldn't find anything with mothers. So they came up with this chemical imbalance theory. And look at this. In order to disprove it, you need labs. You need big labs. You need experienced people and all this stuff. So they came up with oh yeah, it's a chemical imbalance in the brain. They just made it up out of nowhere. Just made it up. And who's going to disprove it? Not the people on the front lines, not the frontline psychiatrists, not the frontline psychologists, not nobody. I mean, eventually some people in the universities who weren't under control of the psychiatric mafia started looking into it, and they could find no chemical imbalance. Matter of fact, they don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain is or should be. They just made this up out of thin air just to make it look like they had some explanation for what schizophrenia is. You know, they've done no studies on it whatsoever. If you were to study the voices, you'd find out that they're consistently negative. They're insulting, they're abusive, they're destructive. They're anti-religious. They don't like the Bible. They don't like preachers. They don't like the 23rd Psalm. They cringe at the 23rd Psalm. They want nothing to do with religion or spirituality. They foster and create negative emotion. That's the reason why they're constantly saying rotten things to these people. You're no good. You're ugly. You're stupid. Nobody loves you. Just you're a drag on everybody. Why don't you just kill yourself? They want to create that negative emotion. That's what they feed off of. And people who hear voices, once they're attacked by them, if they notice, they'll see that their energy level drops to nothing after they're being attacked by these voices, and it's consistent. The voices come, their energy level drops to nothing, and they don't pay attention to it. It's like, oh yeah, they're so horrible. They don't notice that their energy is gone after these things leave, but they know that they didn't use that energy. So where did it go? If they didn't use it, where did it go? There's a one-to-one correspondence between these voices showing up and their energy vanishing. It's these things take it. They have to turn their emotional energy negative before they can take it, because that's what they survive on, that negative emotional energy. Now, as you're listening to these patterns, keep in mind what the mainstream media is broadcasting to us right now. It's all the same thing. Negative, anti-religious, create negative emotion. It's all the same thing. It's a macroscopic version of these voices. They're one and the same. They energetically drain their victims. They get louder after sunset. The voices get louder when ignored. And that's one thing psychiatry said, oh, they're hallucinations, just ignored them. I remember when the first time I checked that out, I was in the office with a psychiatrist who was seeing one of my patients. And he said, well, just ignore them, they're hallucinations. So a week later, I called this guy back and said, how's that going? He said, it's not, it doesn't work. They get louder when ignored. So I started asking other schizophrenics. They said the same thing. You can't ignore them. They get louder.
So Jerry, would that be like they're actually going after a pattern of almost like a frequency from us, like as in the main emotion, like fear, guilt, shame? That's their food, and the
That's
more
their
that
food.
they get, they're trying to raise that vibration,
Right.
raise more of that energy. So this is where the voices come in. This is
Right.
where they're trying to change us with our energy into this.
Into that, so they can feed off of us. They can't survive on positive energy. Their frequency is very low. They're very dangerous. So that's why they put all that negative crap in your head. Now, another thing, they're not physical beings. They're energetic beings. They are energy. They have some level of intelligence. They're programmed to do this kind of stuff.
Now, I had an example that I wanted to ask you about. Was I look at this as like we're almost like lighthouses of energy, and they see somebody with a depression or a negative aura field, and it's like for them, it's like a lighthouse. Like they find you, and then they
Right.
stick with you.
Yeah,
Is
they're kind of like sharks that will attack the weakest.
they know, they see it, they recognize.
They know, they see it. They'll attack the weakest of the bunch, the people who've been psychologically traumatized, sexually abused, mentally abused, physically abused. They go after them.
My own personal experience was after I had serious trauma in my childhood, where I started to have some of these issues and some of these problems. And then as they got older, certain substances like alcohol or other things would make them louder,
Yes.
and then bring in more. It seems as if that the more toxic the humanity is, the better for them. Is
Yeah.
that fair to
Yep.
say?
Yep. And the prisons are full of the mentally ill now that they shut down all the state hospitals. So, they can't hold a job, most of them.
Right.
The voices are raging in their head all the time. They can't tell the difference sometimes between somebody speaking to them and something the voices said in a lot of cases. Um, so they can't hold a job. They either have to beg on the streets like all these homeless people, or they start stealing stuff and then they end up in the prison. The prison is a hog's trough for them. It's a very negative environment. They're very strong there. They're treated badly. They don't give them medicines unless they're causing some kind of disturbance for the most part. They don't try to treat them. The treatment there is substandard in virtually all cases. It doesn't match community treatment standards at all. It's a closed environment. Nobody can get in there to see what's going on. Same thing with the state hospitals. You can't walk into a state hospital and say, "Hey, I want to study the voices." You can't walk into a prison and say, "I want to talk to your schizophrenic patient." They won't allow it. They don't allow it.
Both those institutions are kind of run for profit. Am I fair
Yeah.
to say? And then
Yeah,
we're
they're
the
for
most
profit.
profitable as we can be as the United States compared to other countries that have had different setups, especially trying to rehab. They have different ways about going about it. It seems to be more progressive than we have. We have larger prisons, larger institutions for medical, and more profit, which seems to be
Well, yeah,
counterintuitive.
and now the worst thing that could happen to the prisons is these private prisons for profit. They don't do anything for the prisoners. It's
There's no
all money.
incentive.
It's all money. No incentive. It's all money. If they have to pay anything for a program to help these guys, they won't do it. It's a holding tank. So they bring these schizophrenics in. They lock them in prison. They expose them to these gangsters and these beatings and this abuse and this horrible, negative, terrifying environment. And then after years, they come out of there 10 times worse, and they just release them onto the streets with $50 and 2 weeks worth of meds. They are one of the most disastrous institutions that we have. They're not helping anything. They're just making things worse because virtually all these people eventually get out, and they get out in much worse shape than what they ever went in.
And the only tool they seem to be getting is medicine, which is and not just medicine that's going to be taken off in a short period of time, or to be it's more of a long-term fix than the only fix. And it seems like it limits their ability to ever become part of society in a healthy way.
It doesn't fix anything. All it does is suppresses psychiatric symptoms. It
Right.
doesn't fix anything. It just makes them less. In most cases, the voices are still there. They're just not as strong because what they're using are major tranquilizers. They're dumbing these people down, and they don't tell them that these drugs will shrink your brain. They'll rot out your peripheral nervous system. They will cause neurological damage. They don't mention that. They just go, "Oh, your vision will get blurred. You might be a little groggy for a while, but you'll get used to it." They don't tell them these are some of the most dangerous drugs in use in medicine today.
And I see that there's still some of these drugs. Clonazepam it's almost like a vitamin for most people that have any sort of mental disorder.
Well, what they use Klonopin for is when the neurological symptoms start showing up from the damage of the major neuroleptic drugs, they'll use Klonopin to cover them up so that the damage continues to progress, but the patient won't feel it. So
Right.
they're actually destroying the patient, and he can't detect he's being destroyed other than his brain starts malfunctioning.
So you're degrading the brain function to accomplish almost like a band-aid or a cover
It's a
for the
Band-Aid.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a Band-Aid. And none of them have studied the voices. They just arrogantly dismiss anybody who says, "Hey," and it's the primary symptom in paranoid schizophrenia. It's the
Right.
primary symptom, and they haven't studied it. They just, "Oh, it's hallucinations, and that's all there is to it." And that's what the big pharma wants them to think. That's what big pharma is paying the medical schools to teach. That's what psychiatrists are learning in there. Oh, well, who's going to study a hallucination? If it's a
Yeah.
hallucination, why study it? So they're brainwashed to believe that these things are hallucinations.
Well,
You
it
know?
seems like they keep a narrative, a certain that you only stay within this box of
Right.
thinking, and
Stay
anything
within this
outside.
box. So every time I got caught by psychiatrists asking patients what the voices are saying, I got called up in front of them on the red carpet and told, "You will not, ask questions about the voices. You're just reinforcing their hallucinations and making them worse." And I was threatened. So they don't even want anybody looking into it.
That would make sense. Especially, it seems like it's a system in play that works for them at this point. Because you have patients forever.
Yeah,
You have customers
that's what they
forever.
want. They don't make any money by curing anything. They make money by their constant expensive meds and office visits. You go down to Mexico, 60 miles south of where I am now, and you can get these antipsychotic drugs without a prescription at the drugstore.
Wow.
You don't have to go to a psychiatrist. If you go to a psychiatrist, he'll tell you, "Okay, I recommend this kind of drug." And then from then on, you just go get it. You don't have to go through their office and pay a $150 fee for a psychiatrist to spend 20 minutes with you. You don't have to go pay a pharmacy to get these. They have them. You just get them over the counter. You take them. If they help you, they help you. If they don't, you don't have to take them. They don't force you to take them.
And when
You
you
know,
were in like to the prisons, they're pretty much, it's like, is it a forced situation when they're given the medicine? I mean, how do they introduce
You know,
medicine and then from your experience?
over there, what I've seen is if the patient or the prisoner is causing problems,
Okay.
they're more likely to get an antipsychotic drug to calm them down, to stop them from having the problems. If they're not taking the drugs, they'll lock them down until they do take the drugs.
Right.
Or they'll send them to the medical unit, um, and just hold them there. So they'll you take the drugs or you don't get out of here, basically.
And when you're there, obviously, when you start putting these things together and you're starting to see that there's patterns and this might be something more than just voices, that must have been a moment where you were uh, kind of questioning sanity a little bit. I mean, was there a point where it just made too much sense, and then to be intimidated by the size of the problem? Was this something you just kind of kept under your hat for a while when you were there, just to see if you could get some results?
Well, I had to keep everything under my hat while I was there. There was nobody I could really talk to,
Okay.
and for years, I was finding these patterns. They just kept coming up and coming up and coming up. The more I talked to these people, the more they came up, and it was, these people were from, it started off working at the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet in Georgia, Central State Hospital. They had like 10,000 patients there at the time when I started. So that's when I first started noticing that these things were consistently negative. And why would that be? Why aren't they random like all other thoughts? So they come across as thoughts, negative, abusive thoughts. Why aren't they random? Why aren't they, some of them negative, some of them positive, some of them neutral? Why are they consistently negative and abusive? What holds them to that pattern? Okay. So
Right.
that was the first pattern I saw. The second one was that they were anti-religious, and then 23 of them fell into place years afterward. So they run some 23 patterns that are very obvious, for anybody who's working with schizophrenics. Very clear patterns. Um, and if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Hallucinations are
Right.
random.
And then when you were trying, you see these patterns, you're having these conversations, you're getting information. At this point, you're also trying to find some sort of productive resolution, something you could help some sort of change with them. And then, I mean, I remember distinctly when the first time I was looking at the rubber band idea, just to change the frequency real quick, just to, to snap them out of it, just so they could have enough time so they could read a poem, which for me kind of brings to the idea that you're trying to change the person's frequency, so they're not feed anymore for these dark voices. Is that, I mean, they're trying to change their aura field, whatever. I'm trying to put
Well, the
different
first
ways to
the
look at it.
first thing I started doing, well, I was in denial for years. I mean, for years. I was in denial all the way through, the state hospital. 7 years I worked there. Um, I was in denial when I worked in the mental health centers. I didn't want to see these things as separate entities. I kept thinking, well, it's got something to do with their subconscious or their, uh, there's something. But I saw they were running patterns. You know, so they couldn't. I already knew that by the time I got thrown up in front of psychiatry and threatened. They're running patterns. They can't be hallucination. But there's no telling these guys anything. They're arrogant as the day is long. They're the doctors. They have the answers. They're the specialists. Although they haven't studied the prime symptom of paranoid schizophrenia, which are the voices. They just, they're hallucinations. They have no backing for that whatsoever. So when I started seeing these patterns, they were mounting while I was working in the prison. Because what I did at the prison that I couldn't do when I was in the state hospital, because the unwritten rule in the state hospital is don't upset these guys unless absolutely necessary, because they were attacking psychiatrists at a rate higher than they were attacking any other staff. That's one thing I noticed. The schizophrenics were beating up psychiatrists at the state hospital at a rate 3 times higher than any of the other staff. At a rate equal to attendant staff that were on the ward with them 24 hours a day. And
Dangerous occupation.
I never could figure that out. I didn't know, what are they saying to these guys in 20 minutes to where they're getting clobbered. It didn't make any sense to me until the end of the 7 years at the state hospital, where one gal, when I was in a meeting with her mother, she went off her meds and she was about to be discharged from the program because she went off the meds 3 times. You go off the meds 3 times, there's little, all we knew back then was you got to stay on those meds if you're going to stay sane. There was no other answer.
But the
So
voices were playing mischievous, almost tricks at this point, where they giving the patients part truths, where they're like, the medicine is hurting your brain or giving you malfunction, but it also eliminates their ability to feed on their negative emotions. Is that
right, it's a major tranquilizer, so it dumbs them down. They
okay?
can't get them as upset
Right.
as they do normally.
So you're eliminating their feed.
Well,
They're what
you're impeding it. It
feeding.
doesn't
Okay.
eliminate it, because the voices in most cases, the drugs don't get rid of them. All they do is they temper them down. They moderate them. they're not as strong, they're not as often, but they're still there. In most cases, they're still there. And the voices don't like those medicines because they do interfere with their feeding. So that one gal that I was talking to with her mother, I asked her, what, you were doing great in your classes. She was about to graduate with a degree in cosmetology. She went off her meds the third time. That's discharged. The mother begged me, don't throw her out. I can't deal with her. I can't help her. I'll come up there and we'll talk to her. So I said, well, what I got to lose? So both the mother and I are in there in the office one Friday night afternoon it was, and both of us asking her, why did you go off your meds a third time? You know what would happen. You knew you would get kicked out after a third time. Why did you go off your meds? And she said, you won't believe me. And I said, I've heard a lot of strange things while I was here. Try me. And she came out and she said, the voices told me that I was being poisoned. They told me the psychiatrist was poisoning me. And they pointed to the side effects of the medicine as her being poisoned, which was actually true. Those are the toxic side effects of these meds. They are actually poisoning the person slowly. And a lot of these schizophrenia, it just clicked then. It's like, okay, so that's why the psychiatrists are getting beat up at such a rate. The voices are telling these people that the psychiatrist is poisoning, and that those meds are poison, and they feel the side effects for themselves. They don't need anybody to tell them. They take the meds and all these awful side effects come, and it's one-to-one correlation. They go see the psychiatrist, they've been given these toxic meds, they feel awful. Psychiatrists are poisoning them. Boom. Then they, whack the psychiatrist.
So that's never a conversation you're having with a patient, is to slowly come off the meds or to take meds out of their system. That is just a staple of part of their therapy. Is that
well in general? But with the system I'm using now, and even the earlier systems I was using, you have to be able to reach them. And in a number of cases, if you can't reach them, the medicines will calm them down enough to where you can reach them, and then you can start working with them. But they say, as a maintainer, they should not be used to on a permanent basis by themselves alone, because they're doing damage to these people. They got to be coupled with other things. I mean, they have their place. There's some patients that are so far out and so dangerous, you have to keep them filled with these medications, or they're going to hurt themselves or somebody else. I mean, there's a place for these things, but not as the main treatment for schizophrenia. Because they don't treat, they don't do anything. They just lower the voices. They don't get rid of anything. They don't cure any mental illness. And all those fancy names they made up for all these mental illnesses, they're all made up. Not one of those 295 diagnoses that they have in their DSM is verifiable by any kind of clinical test. They're just made up. They make them up in these meetings. They get together once every few years and they go, hey, I got a new mental illness. It's this, and these are the symptoms. And then they all vote on them. They vote these things in, they vote them out if they're not working out for them. And then the pharmacology, the big pharma comes up behind them and makes all these drugs that supposedly treat these these illnesses. They don't cure anything. None of them cure anything.
Well, they're not looking for any sort of scientific method on having a repeatable diagnosis, it seems like, because it seems like you go to one doctor and one doctor is going to tell you today you're bipolar or have another mental disorder. And this was the feedback I've gotten from some of the veterans, that it just depends who they're talking to and what they feel that day. And they're getting multiple diagnoses, and sometimes from the same doctor.
Yeah, exactly. You put 10 of them in the same room, you give them the diagnosis, the symptoms of something a little more complicated than just, oh yeah, he's hearing voices. But you'll get all kinds of diagnoses. There is no clinical test for any of them.
It seems too subjective for such a serious
issue. It's all
issue.
Subjective. And then they rotate the medicines like a dartboard. So this one doesn't work, try this one. That doesn't work, try this one. So they'll just rotate through this big, their whole pharmacy there until they find one that works the best of the rest with the least side effects for the most part, and then they'll stick them on that one.
Okay.
So come back in a couple of months and let me see how you're doing. So they have to keep coming back to get those prescriptions. It's just a big, especially in the VA hospitals and the private hospitals, and the private hospitals, it's just a big merry-go-round. They put them on the meds, they leave, they go off the meds, they go psychotic, they come back into the hospital. Each time they're charged thousands of dollars to go into, and it just goes round and round and round. Nothing's being cured.
Well, a lot of these veterans that I've talked to and I spent time with, they also go with the idea that they have a smorgasbord, an onslaught of just different prescriptions that you've never tested together. We don't know what these do synergistically. You have 6 or 7 different medicines that they're taking. I mean, it's hard enough to get 1 or 2 medicines done. Is that a wrong way to look at it?
But no, I've seen people with like 5 or 6 medicines. I mean, it's like they're just drug silly.
So it's hard to even tell what's working or not.
The more they complain, the more medicines they give them, because they don't know what to do. They don't have any other idea. They don't know what's causing this. They don't know what to do about it. And here's Big Pharma, who's taken over the medical schools back in the 30s, saying, okay, we'll give you money if you teach this crap and we'll give you stipends, and you publish the research we want to see that'll help us sell drugs, and we'll see that you're well funded. It's one of the biggest, most dangerous scams there is out there.
Yeah, well, I remember the Flexion report, and then it started to take 10, 20 years to start to implement it. But it seems like they had a pretty good stranglehold on what is acceptable medicine, what's
Right,
acceptable to be studied, what theories are allowed, what theories are not to be
right.
allowed.
Yep, that's where it started with the Flexner report back in what, the 30s, I think it was.
Yeah,
They took over medicine, and they made it illegal to treat people with anything but pharmaceutical meds. Doctors could be fired for that. They could have their medical degree lost. They told the medical schools, if you don't teach, pharmacology based treatments, you're not going to be able to graduate medical students. We won't support
yeah,
it.
yeah.
So they took over medicine, and look what happened just now. Look what happened with this friggin' COVID crap. It's the same people doing the same thing. Only this time they overdid it. They really overdid it.
They played their hand really hard, and I think it's helping wake up people to
Well,
recognize that they're.
hopefully it does, because if they don't wake up, they're going to end up dead.
Yeah, yeah, we're because I don't think that's they do not care about
No, they care
losing
about
people's lives.
power, money, and that's it.
That
Power, money,
control,
and
get that
control and
that's it.
influence.
It's
That's it.
they've
And
had a
look at
stranglehold.
the trillions of dollars the pharmaceutical industry is made off of this sham. You know that the actual death rate is like, the survival rate is 99 point something percent. From the COVID itself. I mean, a lot of the older people, they succumb to it. It's no worse in many cases than the flu. At this point, twice as many people have died, millions, as have died from the COVID, from their friggin' injections.
My biggest thing was that they pretty much had to shut down alternative medicines with it, and that they also didn't have any time of telling us that we should be working on our health. You should be going out, getting a little exercise, getting a little sunshine, getting some vitamin D, things that should have been if society wanted you to be healthy and to be able to battle some whatever version of the virus they say is out there, that they should have us focusing on things that actually can get our immune system up. But
Right.
that was never a talking point. If anything, that
No.
was put aside. Like that's you just need the vaccine. You
Well,
just need.
they don't want you healthy. They don't make money off of you when you're healthy.
That's a
They
big
make
point right
money
there.
off you when you're sick, and these COVID drugs have destroyed people's immune systems. So though they might not be dying of COVID, they're dying of cancer. They're dying of all these other things that normally wouldn't kill them. Because their immune system has been compromised. It's been knocked out.
Yeah, I mean, you're starting to see the cancer rate and other rates go up all throughout the board, and it makes people. You have to think. You have to open your eyes a little bit. If we're supposed to be so technologically advanced, to have all this money to research, why are our cancer rates going up? Why is high blood pressure, diabetes, all these diseases that we have normal ways that if we've been doing for 10, 20, 30, longer of research that we can show we can help eliminate these, but we're not. There's no focus. It's not.
Well,
There's no.
they're creating these diseases to make people sick so they can sell drugs to cure them.
That's the saddest part of it. Is that that's what you have to almost
These
look at and
people
realize
they're
it's,
evil. They're
it's a
just
medical. We're stuck in a medical matrix. I kind of look at it that way. Like we've got a system in place. It works well. It's good for control, mentally and financially. And they said you get locked in. A lot of these medical procedures, people go bankrupt over. We had a family member get cancer, and my granddad almost lost his house because they were going to go after him for everything.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for somebody who helped him out to position his house, and he had to go on welfare for a little bit. Just so the hospital wouldn't go after him, because my 8-year-old, or Uncle Andrew at 8 years old, was passing away from leukemia, and they were going to take his house for all that medical treatment. So on top of him having his son, my uncle, pass away at such an early age, and that trauma on the family, the hospital had no problem trying to go after him for his house.
Yep. No, money is the name of the game, and you look at the cost too. Like if you got to get antipsychotic drugs here, it costs upwards of $800 a month to get these things. You go across the border to Mexico, the same antipsychotic drugs made by the same companies in Spanish labels, right, that cost you like 70, 75 bucks. A fraction of what they're charging here. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, I've learned not to mess or talk about any of the medicines with veterans or even first responders, anybody we talk to about mental health. I only thing I can talk to them about is maybe living a healthier lifestyle. So we talk about breathing and maybe some yoga here, but it has to be at that level. And any more extent, they'll come after you. You will have a target on your back. So because you're messing with their money. And so I've really found that that's why we just stick with breathing.
Well, that was the same thing in all the places I worked with. You couldn't talk to these people about what was really going on. Even in the prison, once the schizophrenics I was working with started to fully recover, they noticed that and they went after me. They didn't care that these people were recovering and that they didn't need those drugs anymore. They didn't want me messing with it. They don't want me curing them. And there is a cure for it. You have to work for it. I mean, it takes work, but I've had a number of people completely get rid of the voices, completely gone, but I couldn't start doing that until after I was out of their freaking system because they would cram me for it. I'd let my license lapse because I knew, this new energetic therapy stuff that goes after the trauma, which these things feed off of, has nothing to do with their psychotherapy garbage.
I
That
mean,
stuff doesn't work. It does not work. It just you bring up the same stuff over and over and over and over again, which is all they know how to do.
what,
These are energetic beings. There's no time, there's no space, there's no matter where they're at. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's mind. They can go in there and pull up every rotten thing they've ever done and throw it in their faces until they turn their emotional state negative, and then they drain them. So the biggest thing that the veterans you're working with who are hearing voices need to understand is that those voices are not their thoughts. That's the other thing they're playing on. We're taught from the time we're kids that every thought that comes into your mind belongs to you. No, not at all.
and
A
I think
lot of
that's
them have nothing to do with you and don't come from you. They're inserted into your thought stream. Like Carlos Castaneda says, they give us their minds. And if they believe all that crap that's coming into their heads are their minds broken, and that they've turned their mind has turned on them, and it's now trying to destroy them, it's a downhill slide from there. And that's what psychiatry wants them to believe. You're crazy, you're broken, you're insane. The voices are hallucinations due to some strange chemical imbalance that we don't know about in your mind. And there's nothing you can do except take our toxic meds and poison yourself.
well, that's what made the stories of the Cathars and the Gnostics so intriguing to me was that a group that was pretty much not harming communities, they were pretty much self-sufficient, were gone after with such ferocity, with such ferociousness, where they destroyed their histories and destroyed, I mean, killed women, children, all ages, burned them to death, and destroyed everything about them. Why are you going at them? Their main belief is that there's an archon, that we live in a world where there's negative energies that feed off of us, and that's part of this world.
That's it.
For me, you
It's
wouldn't
there.
spend that kind of energy to destroy that information and those people unless there's something they're trying to cover up. So this might have been a long, it's been for generations. I mean, this is something we've been dealing with as humans in this world for a very long time.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly right. You know, and you look at psychology and psychiatry, there's no spiritual anything to them. There's this is a spiritual affliction. This is like a mental virus kind of thing. It's not physical. They can't treat it with physical means for the most part. It's a spiritual battle.
And then you said you're working with some new remedies or some new it's actually with
Yeah, the
using the
most
John Mace is one
right.
of the you
He
got me onto his books.
Yeah, this guy was brilliant. He didn't have any background in psychology. He was a genius. His main job was being a ship captain, a merchant marine. So he had lots of time to read and study philosophies and psychology and all kinds of stuff. And he pieced together this system that actually goes in there and it gets rid of the trauma. It discharges the trauma, so it's no longer a factor. So these voices feed on that trauma. They go in there and they trigger it over and over and over again. Once it's discharged, they got nothing to feed off of. You
Right.
know, so this is probably the most effective treatment for schizophrenia I've ever seen. Besides knowing what these voices are and how they operate, is the Mace energy method. Yeah, and also some people in the VA. I forgot who it was, but they're working with that was like afterlife imaging. I remember vaguely that what they do is have the person send love to the deceased soldier or whoever died, and then have them have a conversation with them, and it would actually take place. And then they were cured of that guilt of whatever part they may have played in that person's death. I mean, and that guy's working in the VA.
Wow. I mean,
Mm,
I'm hoping for more if that actually can take place. Because from what I think, when I talked to you the first time initially, I told you that I started with the rubber band technique you explained about. Then I read the Mace book, and then I thought I was sending love to the dark voices, but it's actually, if I look back now, I was sending love to myself, and I was changing my frequency. I even like physically hug myself when the voices were there, and it would seem like they would slow down and then almost dissipate, and then it would be gone. But that sort of transition of not giving them and healing yourself seems to be like you're exactly what you're saying is the long term fix. Is that kind of the good
yeah,
assumption
yeah,
here?
it's interfering with these patterns.
Yeah.
That's where I started seeing that. So that was while I was working in the prison. So you know, at the state hospital, if you set somebody off by asking about their voices, because they don't like talking about their voices. Psychiatry would be all over you like a duck on a June bug. What are you upsetting my patients for talking about that? But in the prison, if one of the prisoners went to the warden and said, "Hey man, that's the psych is asking me about my voices and I don't like it," he'd say, "Get out of my face, go, play in the grass or something. Get out of here." So what I had was a special group all the time. I was there for like 18 years who agreed to tell me in real time about what their voices were saying. So while we were working together, as soon as the voices come up, I knew what they were saying. They would tell me. And then I'd try all these different things that would interfere with them and their patterns. And as those techniques began to get better and better, these patients started coming back into my office and saying, the voices are really getting pissed off with you. They don't like what you're doing. Well, that's tough. Tell them to eat crap and die. That kept that. It wasn't just one or two of them. I mean, numbers of them.
Jerry, what were you doing at that time? You made that shift, and the voices are now getting upset, right? So it's whatever you're doing is working. What was that procedure that you started to implement at that point?
The very first thing you got to do is that they have to realize that those voices are not who they are. They don't come from them. They have to make that split, because they're thinking that my brain is broken. I got some kind of chemical imbalance that the psychiatrist told me I had, and there's nothing I can do about it except take their toxic meds. So the psychiatry is doing these people a disservice by it's like, what is it, that Dante's Inferno, where there's this big sign over the door, "All who enter here leave all hope behind." That's exactly what they're doing. There is no hope. There is no cure. There's nothing you can do about it. Your brain is broken. It's chemical imbalance. We don't fully understand anything. Take these drugs. They'll help some. And that's where they want to keep it, because they're making a fortune off those drugs. The pharmaceutical people that would come into the prisons, they'd come into the hospitals, they would just deluge the place all the time, buying dinners and lunches and seminars and pushing their drugs. It was constant. But then when you started interfering with these patterns, they didn't like it. And one of the things was to realize that those voices you hear aren't you. They're not coming from you. There's something different. That split has to be made. For the person to do anything. Now, the voices hate the 23rd Psalm. So a lot of these people have been hearing them for a long time. And I read something called, I think it was 30 Years Among the Dead it was written in the 20s by a dentist who would take these people who hear voices and give them a static electric shock. And the negative spirit would leave them. And then his wife, who was a medium, would pick up on them and talk them into the light. Once that was done, they were gone. They didn't come back. So here I am. I was working with a clinical psychologist at the time, and we're kind of exploring, well, how can we give these people a shock, without me being fired. And here he is. He's sending me all this information about these static electric shock machines, and I'm like, no, that's not going to work. I take that into prison, start shocking these guys. They're gonna fire me. That's not gonna. So it took me like 3 months before, I'm racking my brain. How could I give them some kind of shock that would shut these things up temporarily so I could get through to them with the information that they need to hear? And one day I was standing in one of the warden's offices. I saw a rubber band sitting on her desk, and I went, oh. So I grabbed that rubber band, gave it to one of the guys, and said, "Here, next time you hear your voices, snap this, put it around your wrist, snap it, and see what happens." And they would shut up. He said that the shock of the rubber band snapping hurt the voices much more than they hurt him. They kind of shocked them and shut them up for a short period of time, long enough for them to repeat the 23rd Psalm, which is like punching the voices in the face. They can't stand it. I've had a number of patients tell me that the repetition of the 23rd Psalm in the face of the voices is like throwing them onto a hot frying pan. That's how they react to it. They don't like prayer. They don't like preachers. I think it's the 23rd Psalm and Psalm 91 they absolutely hate. And then there's some Muslim prayers. I mean, the Muslims have been at this longer than we have.
Yeah.
They have prayers that are specifically aimed at these things.
Is that what they call the jinn, right? Or the idea
jinn.
of...
They call them the jinn.
Yep.
Back then. So that was the first thing, is to get them to realize that these voices aren't who they are. They're not them.
Well, I think that's the biggest shift. That's why I like the stories of the Cathars and the Gnostics, and was that the idea that disconnecting yourself from the voice and how empowering that is. That changes the shame, the guilt, because just having that voice, thinking it's a part of you, it puts guilt on you. You feel like, how do I even have that voice saying those dark things to do? how
Right.
is that even part of me? There's something wrong with me. And then it brings it down even further down their line. So I think I see the power in that. And then my question with the snapping is that they respond differently to the physical pain of us rather than they're looking for emotional pain or they're looking for the fear, shame, guilt. But when you use the rubber band, is it they're sensitive so that the physical pain is overwhelming? I know this is a very small intricacy of the conversation, but I just was so intrigued because I had such a similar response playing with rubber band. I'm like, wow, why does this shake them? So do you
Uh,
have any thought into that,
oh,
Jerry, at all? Or
all I know is it does.
it
You
does.
know,
Okay.
it provides that shock. You
But
know,
it's not what they're looking for. They're not looking
they're
for
no,
it's not what
they're not expecting it.
yeah, that's not their
So
feed.
it hits them. They'll shut up for a short period of time because what they do is they're so, you know, people who've been hearing them for years, they don't even realize they're hearing them. They just slowly take over their consciousness, and then they're thinking all this rotten stuff about themselves and everybody else.
Because I've never had the voices where they say, you know, I've heard, I guess they were even worse, but they were saying that the voices came in distinct, I think almost alternative people, like distinct languages or distinct accents. They know it's somebody else. I've never experienced that. I thought,
No,
and actually, I thought about it.
what they most of the time, what they sound like is just like the other tens of thousands of thoughts that go through your mind on
Yeah.
a regular day, except the intention and what they're telling you doesn't fit your intention. You know, it's negative. And I was shocked when I heard that because there was one time I prayed to hear them, you know, just so I could experience what they were like. And sure enough, I got that, you know, and they almost killed me that, you know, shortly after that,
It seemed like
you
it'd be
know.
a smarter play if you were a program or if you that was your job. You don't want them knowing it's a different voice. You want them thinking it's part of them that you know this
Yeah,
voice is theirs. And I think that when I
right.
understood it objectively, I'm like, oh wow, that's
You know, and
a great play on their part.
the patients I've had who actually asked them, "Who are you? What are you?" They come back and they say, "We are you. We are
Right.
you." You know,
Because
they want you to believe that these are your thoughts. You know, because the devil's played no more effective trick than to have people believe that he doesn't exist.
well, some people have that idea that if you ask them, they have to tell you the truth, which is
No,
they don't.
no, no, they're
They're
liars.
jokesters.
That's
They're
it.
liars. That's their
That's
job.
that's the other thing. After the 23rd Psalm is the realization that 99% of what they tell these people are lies. They don't care what they tell them as long as it upsets them. You know, if they'll go in there, they'll pull up some memory that upsets them. They'll bring it up and go, "Look what you did. Look what a rotten bastard you are. Da, 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 da. You see that? You know, you're no good. You're rotten." Da, 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 da. You know, 99% of what they tell them are lies. Okay,
Yeah.
they have to understand that. You know, once they understand that, they can challenge them. That's a lie, and that's different than ignoring them because if you ignore them, they get stronger. So what you resist persists. Once the person gets used to telling them that's a lie, they can't get their hooks in the person because they're not going to believe a lie. You know, and they know they're lying. And I saw that well ahead of time. Then Sherry, who I worked with, who my co-author of the book, um, you know, that would be good for these people, these veterans to read, so they understand what the voices are.
Yeah.
You know, that's the first step. And then doing something about them is the second. And the That's a Lie program is the most powerful freestanding thing we have. The ACE, the Mace therapy stuff, you know, it costs $5,000 to really learn that stuff. And then putting it to use is, you know, there's technical stuff with it, but it works very well. You know, and when coupled with this other stuff, you have a cure for a lot of these people if they're willing to put the effort to make it work.
Well, I'm gonna throw this question in for you. Is that there's been research? I think it was what's his name up in Canada, Dr. Abram Hoffer, with niacin and the idea of if you're getting better circulation, your body's working better, you feel better, you'll have less depressive thoughts. Health also plays a role, I would think, in this healing process, especially long term. If because if somebody's continuously drinking alcohol, they're continuously consuming the toxic things into their body, they could bring back those dark negative energies that they feed off of. I mean, is that a
Yeah,
part of it as well? I mean, obviously, it seems like
yeah,
there's
yeah. They want you to feel bad, you know.
okay,
So they don't recommend, hey, just use marijuana. No, they want you to use alcohol where there's a withdrawal every time. For every ounce of alcohol you drink, there's a 2-hour buzz, and then there's
okay,
a 10-hour low key withdrawal. It's a very nervous low key withdrawal, 10 hours worth before your nervous system gets back to normal. You drink a 6-pack, you're talking 60 hours before
right.
your nervous system gets back to normal. That's the kind of drugs they want you to use. They want you to use cocaine. They want you to use heroin, all these, especially meth. You know, meth is the most dangerous of all these drugs. I mean, I've seen more prisoners go psychotic on using meth than any other drug. You know, it just opens them wide up and these things just move right in. You know, I don't know what it is about meth, but the prisoners call it the devil's drug. You know, and it starts off like They use a little bit too much. They're feeling great. They feel like Superman. And then they start hearing voices. They come down and go, oh, yeah, those are just hallucinations. And then they go away. And that may go on for a couple of months. And then one day they don't. And they're with them for the rest of their lives. And they're just as psychotic as anybody who's locked into a mental hospital. The same thing. They just meth just opens them up, and the voices love meth. I mean, they will tell. You know, I had numerous prisoners tell me when I ran out of meth, the voices would tell me where to go, when to be there to get more, and I'd show up, and there'd be somebody show up with the meth.
Right. There's not just certain people too. Obviously, you have classified a certain group as schizophrenic, but these voices, these dark energies, if you want to look at them, could be affecting everybody. If you're in a dark spot, am I wrong by saying that? If you're fall into a depressive trap, please go ahead.
Well, you don't even have to be in a dark spot. I mean, you could be walking along the sidewalk, minding your own business on a sunny day, and all of a sudden, this awful thought will come into your head. You know, hey, kill this guy or shoot this guy or do this thing. You know, something that you would never normally do. I had one preacher said this guy was a great preacher. He went to visit the Grand Canyon. He's standing on the edge, and he had this thought come through his head. Well, why don't you jump? You know, they hit us all.
Right.
You know, you know, unlike animals. I mean, I remember one time watching a lion chase a gazelle or something, and it didn't catch it, but it almost had it. It had its claws on it at one point. The thing broke loose, and then it gets loose. It runs away. It stops running. It looks to see that there's nothing around, and then it goes back to normal again. It doesn't think about that like we do, remunerating over and over and over and over, you know, like people do. You know?
Right. We just all over the news recently. There was a mom who went through postpartum psychosis, they call it, and she ended up killing her 2 children. And then they come out of it and they almost don't remember. I mean, she's getting charged for murder, but you know,
and you'll hear that
heart goes out to that family.
Yeah, you'll hear that in court a lot. They don't remember what they did. They killed somebody because it wasn't them who did it. It was the voices.
Well, then I started looking into like there's actually there is a more than a significant amount of parents that do this on a yearly basis. It's like 500 kids a year in the United States are from parents going into psychosis. Maybe it was less, but one's too many. And the fact that these parents are finding something in their head to trigger them at that point to do such dark deeds, it's very scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, they can go into your mind. They can put whatever thought they want in there, you know, and even if, you know, there was one time I was out here in Arizona. We mostly don't use lawnmowers. We go out with a machete and cut the cactus down, you know, get them out of the way. So I have a beautiful, pure white husky, and she was out there with me running around, and she runs by, and here comes this thought, cut her head off. And I'm like, what? Where'd that come from? That wasn't me. You know, but even though I would never do anything like that, nor would I think something like that on my own, it was upsetting. You know, it upset me that I had that thought, and it was disquieting, you know, and it was like, that's what they feed off of. Or when you're driving a car and like, I wonder what would happen if I turned into oncoming traffic. You know,
I understand that. And so for me is that you have at least understand that there's a disconnect, that it doesn't have to be you that's saying these voices. I think most people have no idea that this could be something other than
something else. Right. Exactly. Because that's what we're taught from the time we're born. Any thought that comes into your head belongs to you. It's you. No. It's not. Where did nobody asks where thoughts come from. This came up 400 years ago. A Christian mystic, Emanuel Swedenborg, wrote all about this, about how these things put these thoughts in people's heads and then get them to do those kind of things that feed them. You know, he wrote a book called Heaven and Hell, and he was given permission to travel through heaven and hell and interview both these dark spirits and angels. And that's exactly what happens is they put these thoughts into your head. Swedenborg says none of your thoughts belong to you. They come from other places. You're like a radio. Yeah. So you look at your brain like a radio receiver. You know, it changes frequencies, and as you change frequencies, different kinds of music and thought come in. So schizophrenics are tuned to a very low frequency. You know, they have to change that frequency and bring it up, and these things don't want that to happen.
Makes sense. Like it's working for them. It's like a system in place that they've either built or been part of building that keeps going. And it almost seems to me that there has to be some higher level of the system that is involved. I don't know if that's too much to say, but for this to be going on this long and for us to be negligent, to even be open to the idea that this is in our environment, there's a gatekeeper. There's somebody up there who knows. Somebody knows. There's a group that knows. People. You can't hide. That's why I said when they went for the Gnostics and the Cathari and just the Cathars, I'm like, this is a concerted effort.
Oh yeah, they don't want this out. This is the last thing they want out. is that your thoughts may not be your own. And in a lot of cases, they're not. They come from other places. You're like a radio receiver. You're the one who has, control over the frequency, but you have to make the effort to change that frequency.
Yeah.
So with the veterans, number one is realize. I mean, you can get them to use the rubber band. When they start hearing those negative voices, snap it. 23rd Psalm. That's a lie. They have to realize that those voices don't belong to them. That what those voices are telling them to do is not their intention.
Right.
And Sherry says that every negative thought about yourself or somebody else comes from them. They plant these things in your thought stream. And like Carlos Castaneda said, I mean, he kept alluding to this through his entire series. And then toward the end, he goes, they give us their minds. And their minds are morose and dark.
Yep.
And then they feed off of the energy that we generate. It's kind of like what we do with cows. We let them out in the pasture. The farmer lets them out. They eat the grass. They feed themselves. They produce milk. And then the farmer brings them in, isolates them, drains them, and then puts them out again. And that's exactly what these things do.
I try to use analogies sometimes with vets, and they do as well when they talk to each other. It's almost as if we could say they come like our brain is a computer, and they come in with a program that they're going to put in that runs along with our programs, our natural programs, that doesn't cause any red flags, but it also gets the result that they would like.
Yeah, it's like a computer virus.
Computer virus.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a mental virus. But these things are energetic. They're not physical. They're energetic. There is no time. There's no space. There's no matter where they're at. So they can follow these people everywhere. They can go to the ends of the earth and they'll still be hearing those same voices. And time and space don't matter to them.
Yeah.
It's a totally different concept. And psychology and psychiatry aren't willing to look into any kind of spiritual anything. All they want is stuff that they can measure, and they can't measure these.
And you're getting great results. You're saying in our previous conversation with the Mace
I'm getting good results.
Good results. Okay. And this is the $5,000 therapy you're talking about, where they're in the VA hospital, or what kind of conditions are they in?
This is a
private section.
This is a private school.
Okay.
In Perth, Australia, where they teach the Mace method.
Okay.
Yeah. Now the books that I gave you, they'll give you the basics. They'll give you enough to work with. It's like Volkswagen compared to a Ferrari or something, but it'll still work. You won't get all the other stuff that comes with it, but basically, if you learn what's in those books, you'll be able to do that with veterans.
Right. Because we've had such more of a health and physical side approach, which it has had great benefit. The guys love it, but it's just lightening, and it will just help, which is good. It's empowering. I'm not a monotherapist. I don't believe in monotherapy. Like, I don't believe there's one answer for everybody. I collaborate and see what works, and bring as many different ideas as possible. Let the cards, let the results be what they're supposed to be, and then you can adjust and keep getting better, progress. With the Mace therapy, and reading the book, it's very intriguing. But I have a hard time getting the guys to even read a book. And sometimes the other vets have told me
they don't have to read the book. You read it, and then you work it with them.
Okay.
So what Mace found was that the mind is not what you think the mind normally is. He found that the mind, all it does is it takes pictures of what the attention is focused on. So wherever you put your attention, the mind takes pictures of it. And it's constantly providing you those pictures. It doesn't analyze anything. It doesn't think about anything. All that is done by the spirit. And he found that if you can get an image, and you can turn a feeling into an image, that the basics is that energy moves from negative to positive. Electricity moves from negative to positive, and it's the positive that absorbs the negative. So if they can get an image of feeling, turn it into an image, and then concentrate on that image until it disappears, that feeling will disappear with it.
Okay.
That's the basics of it.
I'm gonna have to work on some abstraction of the Mace method into.
Just read those two books. You'll have enough information to put it to work.
Okay, I definitely going to work on that. The other idea I was going to ask you about is like a lot of the fear base. It's kind of our fight or flight mode we stay in. And like the polyvagal theory of being the idea of Dr. Stephen Porges. He's either hated or liked. And mostly the psychologists and the science community kind of hate him because he's helping kids with ADHD just by listening to music, changing their frequencies. Those kind of we tried playing Johnny Mathis music, which sounds ridiculous. The chances are like those kind of songs, and the veterans seem to love it. Like there
Yeah.
was,
See, these voices don't like calming, pleasant music. They want this acid rock stuff. Like this what
you've
is
seen that too then. So this is
Oh
something
yeah,
that,
yeah, very clearly. Yeah,
okay.
they will turn the person toward this friggin' acid rock rap crap where it's oh yeah, kill and maim and blah, 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 all that. They want that.
It was such a pronounced response, and it was across the board on how all of them were responding and felt themselves being elevated in their mental mood. I was blown away. I was blown away, and then I kind of started thinking about the physical side of things, where it's just you get stuck in fight or flight. Your body responds a certain way. You have to be able to switch and rest and digest. And if you're caught into the, like we do work on breathing patterns because people hyperventilate, they don't have enough oxygen in their body. It's a perpetual pattern. It's cyclical. It's just going to continue to get worse. And these the physical side of this is if you become healthier, you can implement all of these therapies like the Mace therapy even better and faster. And that's what my hope is, anyways.
Well, yeah,
or be at least open to it as
that
well.
helps, but it's not necessary. It
Right.
helps, but it's not necessary.
You're
Yeah,
saying that you could
music,
just
yeah, even if they're not feeling well. I mean, yeah, and a lot of times their mental state determines their physical state. So if
right.
they're always anxious and they're always paranoid and they're always fearful and these things are constantly beating on them, they're not going to feel good. How could you?
Right. See, we were playing the other side because we didn't have as many options, especially in the last 10, 15 years. We've only had the physical side. So it's like if the physical health is better, your mental health is better. But it seems to be like almost it helps, but it's still not a long-term fix.
It's not going to do it.
Right.
Not by itself.
It's a tool to help, but like I said, we're trying to get long-term recovery here. We want the permanent fix, and that I see where the Mace method. I've read his book, and I have yet to really start working on it with the guys, and the girls. But I'm excited about it because that side of it, and it's pretty much. I mean, you're pretty much reprogramming the brain. Jerry, is that a way to look at it?
What you're doing is going in there. See, the thoughts are energetic. They're energy.
Right.
And what happens when you hit a trauma like most of these veterans do is the ego takes it and it's painful. I mean, it's like when you stick your hand on a hot oven. You don't think about taking it off. It just leaps off by itself. Well, the ego does the same thing when you hit a trauma with the pain of a trauma. It takes it and it buries it alive. And it takes a lot of energy to hold it in there. So it forms a ridge. So you have that energy wanting to get out, and then you have the energy you have to expend to keep it there, and it forms a ridge. So what the Mace energy method does, it goes in there and it releases that energy from that buried trauma and puts it back into the positive side and drains it. So what happens is somebody buries some and commonly it's like somebody you hate. Okay, that's a negative identity that something happened to you earlier that makes you hate those kind of people. Right? And when any of them come around, they trigger you. You don't even know why, but you just don't like these people and you stay away from them and you fight with them and you argue with them and you know it's not good to be near them. That's a negative identity that's buried in there somewhere that this person is triggering. And it keeps being triggered over and over and over again. The more it's triggered, the bigger it gets, and then the person starts considering it as part of their personality. But the Mace energy method allows you to go in there, locate that spiritually. I mean, it's the person's spirit who tells you where it's located. Otherwise, you'd never find it. You go in there and de-arm it, like defusing a bomb, and then releasing that energy back to the person, And then now, once that's done, when those people come around, they don't bother them anymore. They're like, okay, I know what you're about. Get lost. They're done. And that would help the veterans so much because you can't go into war without trauma. You can't do it. They come out of there devastated. And here's these damn politicians, like freaking Biden, like, oh yeah, we're gonna start a war with Russia. I mean, no big deal. Yeah. Send them tanks, send them rockets. Enhancing the murder and the slaughter. Bastards.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to work on just simple allegories, little analysis for them. So do you have any recommendations when you're trying to explain to somebody for the first time? Especially, it's a lot for them. Especially some of these guys aren't spiritual; they've lost all spirituality or the sense of God because of what they've seen, and they don't even like the idea of it. They don't like the idea of a dark side.
I know, and I run into the same thing. These guys are God-forsaken in most cases. They've just tuned out God. So I just tell them, I say, hey, I've worked with hundreds of schizophrenics, and they're all saying that the voices hate the 23rd Psalm. Whether you're religious or not, you say that, it hits the voices back. It gives them some control over these things, because they don't feel like they have any control. These things are ravaging their mind. The drugs aren't working. Psychiatry is telling them lies about what they are. Nothing's helping, and they have no control. Psychiatry took whatever little control they had.
Right.
But you start telling them, hey, listen, take control. These thoughts are not yours. They don't belong to you. Break it off, separate it. And then you can say, now you can hit them. You hit them with the 23rd Psalm, you hit them with the lie. So now you can fight back because you have an enemy to fight back against. That enemy is not you. It's not your
Right.
mind. You're not insane. This is like a virus. It's a mind virus. You can fight back against it. It is possible. But from what psychiatry is telling them, they don't stand a chance.
Yeah.
Yeah, your mind is broken. There's nothing you can do about it except take our toxic meds, and then you'll get worse, and then we'll give you different toxic meds, and give up all hope. This is the only treatment. It's diabolical. It's just diabolical what they're doing.
Jerry, are you seeing any change at all in the conversations that are going on with psychiatry? Just because of even you being exposing this, and so many
No.
other people are trying.
They're like the monkeys. So they see no evil.
Yeah.
They're like, they don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
They've been brainwashed. They won't even look. Now I have had some doctors contact me. I had 2 psychiatrists contact me, but for the most part, they don't want to hear it. This is a threat to their profession. They're looking for some kind of physical something that they can cure. All their diagnoses, all these mental illnesses that they have, they've dreamed them up. There's no test for them. There's no cure for them. They don't have anything. All they have is the meds that the big pharma provides them. So they're basically glorified drug pushers with diplomas. They're not curing anybody.
I've seen the results with Dr. Porges with his treatment for kids with ADHD because it's non-invasive and it's inexpensive. That he gets ridiculed by so many doctors. I mean, there are some that are jumped on board once they've seen the results, but very few. And the mainstream, the ones that are normally leading the colleges or the universities or the big hospitals, nothing.
They're all paid off by big pharma. They try to change their tune. Big pharma will pull their funds. No more research funds, no more grants, no more da da da. They're all manipulated by big pharma and the trillions of dollars they're making from poisoning people.
And what's the best thing that we could do? I mean, is it just raising awareness? I mean, where do you see? How do we help as many people as possible? You with the most experience you had, is it just one-on-one conversations? What we're doing right now with people. What other things can other people do? Because the vets love this stuff, and they also feel that they're shut down because they've talked to their doctors, they talk to their hospital, and they're getting even worse responses than what we get. They don't accept any of these ideas.
I have a bunch of stuff on my website at jerrymarzinski.com. They can go to the articles section and read those articles. I've got hundreds of videotapes on there. All of them would explain somewhat what these things are. I've got interviews with people who used to be schizophrenic, talking about how they broke out of it, and verifying what I've said. It's there.
You're saying the best thing we should be doing is it's one-on-one. It's talking to people that are local to us, helping as many as we can near us, because we're pretty much battling a beast that is huge.
Yeah. It's huge. I mean, you look at what's coming over the mainstream media right now. It's the same exact things as these patterns. There's a one-to-one correspondence between what they're hitting us with over mainstream media and these patterns that the voices run. It's the same entity on a macroscopic scale.
And have you seen any of these studies into the drugs where they start looking into them and there's little bits of fluoride and little bits of other chemicals that are put in almost every, I think it was the clonazepam, somebody was doing the research on it, and they were finding residues of other chemicals that harm the brain. Is that something that you've also seen or heard, or is that just the drug itself that's causing some of the damage? Have you had any feedback on that?
Well, not so much Klonopin, but there's a lot of feedback on, there's a book written called Toxic Psychology. I think it was Brigham who wrote it. Toxic Psychiatry. He'll explain all these. Those drugs are toxic. They're toxic. They shrink the patient's brain. And what they found is when they started doing autopsies of people who were in state hospitals and people who've been on these drugs for long periods of time, is their brains were shrunk like walnuts. Of course, when they brought that out, Big Pharma and the psychiatric mafia is like, oh no, it's not us. It's not the drugs. It's the schizophrenia. And they denied it and lied about it. But then it was replicated time after time after time after time. It was linked to these drugs that they're giving. Those drugs shouldn't be given on a permanent basis. It shouldn't be the standard treatment for schizophrenia.
Right.
It doesn't cure anything, and it's doing more damage long term than it's helping. You're actually poisoning these people with those things. They're some of the most dangerous drugs used in medicine today, and they won't tell the patient that.
Well, actually, I was just getting some of the questions that the veterans were asking me to ask, and that's why I thought that the idea that one of them in particular, he went after he got off his medication, or he slowed down to only one. he started doing detox programs because he found that he had high levels of metals and some other things in his body. And he said he started to feel better after he detoxed for almost a year. He was doing sauna, all these kind of things to help his body. But he was doing SPECT scans. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Amen. Dr. Amen, he does, they do the brain scans where they see how certain parts of the brain is functioning. And when he did his scan, certain parts of his brain had shut down or were definitely had limited blood flow. And they started doing these detox therapies. And he said a little over a year or so, his scans started lighting up again. His brain started to gain more function.
Well,
So,
you know, it'd be interesting to do brain scans on these people that have been on these medicines for a long period of time. I bet you they'd find something, you know, straight up the damage. I know with shock treatments, the neurologists were able to see the neurological damage after just one, you know,
right.
back in the 70s. You know, and they're still using those things today.
Yeah. Yeah. But I love seeing some of the videos you put up. I think everybody should definitely, if you could go check him out, his website. You think you still on Facebook as well, or?
No, I got
Another,
off of Facebook when they started censoring me. I won't screw them. You
okay.
know, I can't tell the truth there. I got thrown, some of the videos got thrown off of YouTube, but for the most part, they lift most of them up.
Well, you've got some great stuff on YouTube, and your
I got on
interviews was
YouTube,
really
I
what
got
got me.
Rumble.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Rumble. Great. So I definitely recommend
And
getting on Rumble.
they can go to my website at jerrymarzinski.com and go under videos. All the videos are there all the way back to when we started.
Because that's what kind of got me lost in it, is when I first got introduced to you, and I started to just listen to. I just listened to those 2 hour, interviews you had with people that were schizophrenic, or just some of your experiences with them. I mean, the book was great. I think the book's a really nice way to kind of balance out all the information. But I think the interviews have a lot of little details that you kind of get once you see somebody go through it and the experiences that they have and the heartfelt conversations that you have with some of these patients, some of these people that you've worked with. I mean, it shows how much can be accomplished and how good it's got to feel to get rid of these voices.
Oh yeah, yeah, and you know they have to work at it. I mean, it's not as easy as taking a pill. There's things that they have to do to challenge these things. You know, like that's a lie program. Every time they hear those voices, they got to come back. That's a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie. Over and over again. You know, they can't let them get away with it. You know, there's a number of things they have to do, and they have to turn onto a positive spiritual path at some point to change their frequency. You know, if they just stall out, these things are going to come back. You know, Sherry says that the voices she heard, you know, half a century ago are still coming back every once in a while just to test the waters to see if she's open to them again. You know, they'll come back. They're parasites. They need to understand that these things are energetic parasites. They are draining them. So if you had a leech on you, wouldn't just sit there and look at the leech. You know, oh my God, I got a leech on me. You pull it off. You do something about it. It's the same thing with these things. They have to do something about them. They can't just sit there and take the battering and go, woe is me. There's nothing I can do. There's a lot of things they can do when they have to do it. You know, nobody can do it for them. They have to be able to do it.
I think you pretty much said it right there with the idea that it's not something it's a quick fix. It's something that you have to adjust. You have to understand what's going on and then apply methods continuously. And then they are going to get weaker and weaker in their progression of you. I mean, the idea that there's just a switch that you turn them off. I mean, it almost would implement that they would or imply that they're not what they are.
No, they're not physical, so you can't do that. Even a lot of exorcists, when they'll exorcise them, the things will leave for a while. But if they don't continue on a positive spiritual path and keep working to change their frequency in a more positive direction, these things will be back. They'll be back. It's
Right.
just like the Bible says, you know, yeah, you go ahead and sweep out the house, but if you leave it empty, these things are going to come back twice as bad. And that's exactly what I've seen happen. You know, we've gotten rid of them. The guy doesn't do anything else once they're gone. He doesn't keep moving on a positive spiritual path. He doesn't keep trying to improve his mental health. He just goes, okay, they're gone. You know, it's not like a biological disease. It's not like an infection where you take medicine and you kill it and it's gone. It doesn't work that way. You know, they think it does. Well, you take these pills and they'll go away. No, it doesn't work. These are energetic entities. They have to be fought on an energetic level, on a mental level. You can't physically do anything to get rid of them.
Do you think you had these experiences or exposed to them or aware that you might have been before you start learning about this information? So before in your youth, did you ever have these voices? Did you ever, I mean, I can tell you from my own personal experience that I've had weird voices, at certain points in my life where, they say things that are outlandish, like drive onto oncoming traffic, things that are just outlandish and then make you immediately respond in a emotionally negative way. Was that something that you've also?
I think, yeah, I've had stuff like that happen, but it was like, before I knew what these things were, it was like, well, what's that?
It
Where'd
didn't
that come
stick.
from? It didn't stick. Well, I think what my upbringing did for me, for the most part, was to distrust authority. So after 8 years of higher education, 4 years in psychology, 2 years in counseling, another 2 years in a psychology PhD program, I didn't trust what they were telling me. And I would look for contradictions. And after I spent 4 years or not 4, it was 7 years working at that state hospital, surrounded in a sea of insanity. Here I go into a PhD program, and here these people are trying to tell me what this stuff is. All they have is labels. They don't have a functional thing of what to do about it. They label these things. They break all this stuff up into segments, and they label it and make it a pathological label, as if that's the disease. Because we call it paranoid schizophrenia, or we call it bipolar. I mean, as if it's like a real disease. It's not. It's not like an infection. It's not like a broken leg. It's not like a headache. It's not like that. It's a totally different realm. And physical stuff doesn't impact it. Those physical medicines, they'll impact your brain. It's like pouring syrup on a radio receiver. It's going to gum it up. It ain't going to work right.
Right.
You know?
It might lighten it a little bit, but it's not fixing the problem.
No,
Almost
it
like
doesn't fix the
most of
problem.
modern medicine nowadays is not fixing the problem. It's putting band-aids on things.
Well,
It's just,
especially when it comes to psychiatry, and people are dying from these drugs. They're dying from these drugs, and that doesn't ever hit the mainstream news.
okay. So have you ever thought about what kind of world we could be in where this could change? I mean, could we, because right now it's a for-profit medicine situation. Could we make it where it's a for-profit for health? Like a result-oriented business. Where is our transition for the future? I mean, I got kids.
Well, this is like good versus evil. I mean, it starts with the individual person and then spreads out, to maybe the schools or the committees or the boards. We have to take the power away from these scum that are paying with for this deceit with money. Look at the whole COVID thing is money and
Yeah.
power. These people have to be brought down. They have to be brought down. People need to wake up. They can't just walk around and go, hey, there is no evil influence on this planet. I don't see any demons around. I don't see any devils. Lock them into a prison for a while on a criminally insane ward. They'll change their mind.
It seems like we have truth out there, and they even show us little bits of it, even in movies and in shows. They tease us almost with what's really going on.
Well,
And
they want people to watch that kind of stuff. They want
Yeah.
people to watch these terror movies, these war movies, these negative movies. That feeds them.
Yeah.
Yeah, same way with the negative music. That feeds them. They want them to go to war. That feeds them. It's a hog's trough when they do that. They want to control the politicians that want to start wars.
It's better for control, is it not? I mean, to keep us in fear. Even
That's
our
what
part
they
of our
wanna do.
brain shuts
Yep.
down. The front of our lobes of the cognitive thinking part starts to be inhibited when we
Right.
start to stay in that fight or flight mode. And everything you're
Pe-
saying with the music and the change to the
Yeah.
movies.
People are more easy to control when they're afraid. And they want you to rely on the government. Oh, rely on the government. Yeah, the government will take care of you.
Are
No,
are you doing talks out there? Are you going to groups, or is it pretty much just online and
It's just online.
okay.
I've never, I talked to a couple of churches when I was invited. If I'm invited, I'll talk. I don't care.
Okay.
The people need to know this. I mean, they need to wake up. They're asleep. They're asleep. They're walking around completely asleep. Just hypnotized by the physical world and not paying any attention to the spiritual aspects of who they are, what they are. We're spiritual beings. I mean, if your spirit leaves you, your body dies. It just drops. And these are spiritual consequences. These are spiritual entities. They're negative spiritual entities. They're good spiritual entities also. But you choose what you want to listen to. You're like the radio receiver. You either tune into the good stuff or you tune into the bad stuff.
It seems rare that you could find somebody like that. I want to first off say thank you for what you've done in your career. I mean, what humanity needed was somebody like you who was able to make a conscious choice to help, and because most people are so financially involved and stuck in a position that they're afraid to even question what's going on, to challenge the prevailing wisdom. And what you've done and the time you put in, like, I hope people use you as an example of what you should be doing. Challenging.
Well, yeah, if I wasn't retired, I couldn't do this. I'd be fired. I know that. Matter of fact, the last private hospital I worked in, the psychiatrist there saw what was happening. These guys were coming out of my office with their voices gone, in better shape. He saw this. He didn't know what I was doing, and I couldn't tell him what I was doing because I didn't trust him that much, but he saw it. So at the time I was about to leave that private hospital and retire from there, I told the director, I said, listen, I'll teach your chief therapist what I know. I'll come back and I'll teach him. And she said, oh, okay. So I had to go through all the stuff as if I were being hired again as a volunteer. And then when the psychiatrist found out about that, he said, well, maybe we ought to take it up to risk management first before we do anything, because
Wow.
he had been sued before. They took it up to risk management and they knocked it out. They just, no, why even take the
Where's the
risk?
risk though? I mean, the only risk is if they lose business. I mean, that's the only thing that they lose customers, is it not? I mean,
Well,
where's the risk? It's
that would be the main one I would see.
there's no physical risk to the
If these
patient.
guys were getting better, they wouldn't come back and feed the system. So it's this big merry-go-round they have where they bring these people in, they keep them for a week, they fill them full of drugs, they get them as stable as they can, they release them, they go out, they stay off those drugs for 6, 9 months, they go psychotic again. When they go off them, they come back again, and the merry-go-round spins again. Each time, these people are making thousands and thousands of dollars from hospitalizing these guys, from insurance, from parents, from the government, from all over. They're getting rich doing this. It's just a big merry-go-round that cures nothing. Nobody's being cured. Nobody's being helped. They're just drugging them senseless.
If I try to do any of this stuff that I was doing with, say, public money, I would never be anywhere. They would
But
shut me down.
yeah,
I've had
you'd
to
be
do this
shut
on my
down.
own privately, my own money, my own funds, and my own creativity. And then it's the only way I've been able to get out there and help. Because as soon as I start trying to, like I said, I can only imagine for you, anything that's alternative, that I'm not even saying take away the drugs. You can still stay with your
Right,
doctor. I say
right.
please do. You could use this with. This is
Well,
something that'll help with.
this is major threat to them because it's something that actually works. They don't want something that works. I do have a private practice and I'm pretty busy. So I meet people from all over the world. I mean, I'm talking to people in Japan. I'm talking to people in Ireland, Scotland, England, Britain, Australia, all over. And the patterns are the same. This is if they're running patterns, these things are not hallucinations. People need to know that the voices are not hallucinations. These are evil entities that are inserting negative thoughts into their minds and trying to get them to act on them. Once they act on them, then there's more trouble. And once they get in trouble, then they get thrown to prison. That's a constant negative environment. It's a constant fearful environment. It's a hog's trough. These things are they're feeding in there like a hog's trough. There's some of the gangsters. They would convince some of these psychotic guys to stop taking their meds, and then once they got paranoid and psychotic, they'd start telling them, hey, that guy in the other gang over there, he's planning to kill you. You better do something about that. So they'd use them human torpedoes, and then that guy would go over and try to kill that guy, in the opposite gang. I mean,
One of the
it's
wildest
nuts.
stories in your books was when you were explaining one of the inmates, I believe, had the voices tell them where to get the drugs, how to sell the drugs, where to go to.
Oh yeah.
And then the only reason why he got in trouble is he went into jail because he was greedy. He stopped listening to the voices. So I mean, that's what he said to you, anyways. But
Well, there was one who did that. That was the one where he was telling them, the voices were telling them which houses to rob, when to
right.
go there, when the people were up. So they know things that we don't. I mean, they told the guy, the cops were coming up this alley. Don't go up that alley. Go down to this other alley. Hide in the trash can. I mean, they know things that we don't. But it's all for the negative. It's all for the eventual destruction of the persons that they're infesting. They hate the human race. They
You could
hate the
feel
human
that.
race.
Yeah. You could definitely think they have just
And
absolute disdain.
they especially hate children. You
Yeah.
know, they can't stand children. Then you look at all these pedophiles that are trying to normalize pedophilia and all this trans sex stuff. I mean, it's sick. It's just plain sick. That's all there is to it. This is not normal stuff. This is, you know, it's crazy. And they're here, they're trying to normalize it. Oh, this is normal. And now they're trying to get you to forget that they killed millions of us. Oh, just forget that millions of people have died from COVID that we created and the government paid for, Fauci paid for, created in labs in China. No, just forget about that. Forget about the millions of people have died because of the vaccine. So just go on with your lives. We'll come
Well,
up with another pandemic shortly. Hang in there.
well, that's got to be. They've already put so much time and effort into it. They've already programmed us for the
Oh,
first
yeah,
round.
Gates already said they're coming. Another 2 years. Another one's coming.
Yeah, it seems systemic. I mean, at this point, they know what they want to do and accomplish, and they've got time. They just keep.
They got time and they got the money.
They got the money. They've got the funds to do it. Just never-ending printer of funds, and it's been working for a long time. I think this is the closest they've gotten.
Well, it's about to crash. It's going to come down. It's not long now.
Well, I said we were talking about with the voices and the idea that you don't hear. You hear the voices in your own voice, not in a different one, and that they know things about your past. I thought those are the two, I don't say smartest program on their part, but that's the best way to look at it. The most devious part about it, because it makes you believe it's you.
Yes. Yeah. That's they're energetic beings. Your thoughts are energetic. You know,
Because how could they know? How could somebody else know that dirty deed or that dirty thought or
right,
that dirty thing that I had in my mind that long ago or something
right.
I could have done or a mistake I made that nobody knows?
Well, the most devastating ones where I've seen them turn that against the victim was, a couple of girls. It's happened two times that I know of, where they were horrendously abused by an uncle or father. I forgot exactly who it was, but it went on for years. Finally, that guy died, and they were at the funeral. Okay, attending the funeral, and finally they're relieved. This guy's finally gone out of my life. Thank God, I don't have to deal with him anymore. And here they are in the funeral, and a voice comes into their head and goes, "Hey, Sarah, you remember when I did this to you? I'm not dead. I'm still here. You haven't got rid of me."
Wow.
Devastating, absolutely devastating to those people. It had to convince them that wasn't the dead guy. You know, they knew what this guy had done, and they just took on. They're diabolical. They're evil. They're very evil.
Well, I think what you've done and your book has done is giving us a better set of the rules of the game. The game, if we don't know the rules, we can't play well. We're
Right.
going to be pushed around like
You can't
pawns.
you can't fight back.
You don't know how the game is played. And they said with like the Gnostic knowledge, it was great. It was an awakening that there's the different rules on the board, but I didn't understand the rules. It was only after seeing a lot of the stuff that you tried and your tribulations and in your book and some of the other books that you've got me onto that you start to get the pieces of the game. And then all of a sudden now you're playing the game. And the control that you get by the understanding, it changes everything.
It
It
does.
gives you a chance.
It changes everything about everything. When you realize that these negative thoughts that come barging through your head don't come from you.
And there was a lot of smart people in the past that would say that, but people just call it like symbolically, like, oh, there's just an allegory. Or no, you're the space in between the thoughts. You're the person in between
Right.
those.
You're the space you're the one who makes the decision to listen to them or not listen to them, to move in a positive direction, or you're the decider. It's like the cartoons had, you have an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other, and they're both speaking to you. You choose who you're going to listen to. And the
Yep.
Indians said, they were talking about the wolf. I mean, which wolf you feed is the one that's going to get stronger. You either feed the good stuff or you feed the bad stuff.
Yeah, I definitely found some other cultures other than what we teach here have some other ideas about this. This is something that even the American Indian culture, Native
Right.
Americans, they understood.
They understood.
Uh,
They understood.
well, this has been an amazing time with you, Jerry. I got to tell you, this is just I was super excited to have this time with you and to just kind of get some of these questions out and then to get some feedback on what we're doing and what we should be doing and anything we can do to help. I really do want you to keep in touch with us. It's any way you can. We'd love to help you in whatever you're doing or any adventures you go on because, like I said, I think at this point we need to support each other as much as we can.
Spread the word. Get it out there. There's plenty of information on my website. I'm trying to write more, but I'm fairly busy with the private practice I started. And I'm getting people who are willing to come step forward and say, yeah, I went through this and exactly what you're saying. It's right on. I mean, I've heard it over and over and over again, but a lot of them don't want to come out and say it because there's a stigma to being psychotic. It's deemed a bad thing. You're bad,
yeah.
You're broken, something's wrong with you, something strange is wrong with you. And we don't know what it is, and we don't want to catch it. So we don't want to hang around with you too much. We don't know what you're going to do. You're spooky. The way the psychiatric mafia is working right now is it's a disgrace.
Well, they've got a really good system. I mean, good. It's a dark system that works.
It's a very dark system.
And it works very well. And like you said, they put up stigmas. Like I said, like that, the first thing we had in our conversation was just getting the veterans, or even we said somebody work with first responders as well, to be open, just to be able to talk about this. And we're not recording this. This is just a one-on-one conversation. But people have a very hard time even just being open to it. It's scary, the idea that the voices in their head, and they still relate them to themselves. Even though we could have this conversation with them, explain to them, that there's a differentiation between the voices in you. It's been so long that they've been programmed and chemically through their brain that it's not.
And then parents don't want to, oh, you're telling me my kid is possessed? Who are you? Right away, man. That's something I had to be real careful of, especially in the emergency room where I was, I had to determine they don't want you working with people in the emergency room. They want you to get people out of the emergency room, as quick as you can, to keep the flow going. They don't want you spending time trying to help them. They just want, do they go in or do they go out or send them somewhere else? Just get them out of here. So with what I knew, I wanted to give them as much information as I could that would give them a fighting chance. But I had to be very careful with that Because if any of that got back to psychiatry or their families or anything, see, they knew what I was talking about. So I had to be very careful to choose which ones I thought could handle that information and not go running to psychiatry and say, and I'd ask them, what do you think the voices are? What do you think they are? Do you feel an energy loss every time they attack you? Do you feel your energy disappearing? And they'll say, yeah. Well, where do you think it goes? Did you use it? No, I didn't use it. Well, then where'd it go?
And to
Let them come
humanize,
to it themselves.
right.
If you didn't use it, then something's taken it. Every time you hear the voices, your energy level drops. Where do you think it's going? Who do you think's taking it? You're not using it. Where's it going? Let them figure it out on their own. Just, walk them through it. And once they got that, once they realize these things are parasites and they're not them, now they can fight back. You give them the stuff to fight back with.
My question would also be then, as you are in the private practice side of this, you see all walks of life, all age groups. It seems like this would not just be one sector of humanity. This could affect everybody, is it not?
Yeah. There's no there's no there's no exclusions. I mean, it's they get everybody to some degree.
And then is there certain ages that, like I said,
yeah, there is, and I don't understand it. Around 25.
Really?
Around 25. Most psychotic breaks occur around the age of 25. I have no idea why that is.
Wow.
Don't know.
Maybe because they have more energy, more life energy, as they call it. I don't know. But yeah, I guess that, but you've seen a pattern. That's my question.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a pattern there. And the other thing that shocked me when I was working in the ERs is how young some of these kids are that start hearing voices. I didn't think it affected young kids. Oh, it does. It does. They start with abusing animals is one of the big indicators. They start being cruel to animals, that their dog, their cat, or they start killing things. There's something wrong there.
Yeah, from my experience, it was 5 years old when I had my first big trauma at my age. Was when I started to experience darker voices. I just put it that way, and it just it took a while. I used and I didn't have any other tool except for my mom being very devout Catholic, so we used prayers and things like that. And
prayers work. They don't like prayers. They don't like prayers. They don't like you asking for help from the positive side. There is no God. He's not listening to you. They'll do everything they can to discourage you from turning to the light, moving into the light.
Yeah, and I saw that helped me a lot. I did not understand it until I look back at it now. That wow, those little things helped, and me just having that faith and that belief.
Yeah, that's main. That's main. That's main, and you have to be careful with the schizophrenics because it's kind of like somebody who hasn't eaten for a long time, or drank for a long time. You start pouring water in there, they're going to get sick. They can't handle a lot of it. So usually I start with the 23rd Psalm. Whether you believe in God or not, these things react negatively to the 23rd Psalm. They don't like it. You want to hit them back? Hit them with that.
Yeah, and not to say it's a mono-religious either here. I've seen other religions, you as well, Muslim prayers, that this is not something that's just one religion is the answer here at all. It is not that. It is the energy that you get, the belief of calling upon a higher power. Is it not?
Right.
I mean, or I'm trying to label this, but it's that idea that they don't like.
Or the existence that there is a higher power, because a lot of these people don't believe it. They're stuck in the dark. There's the door's shut. They seem trapped in there. They can't see a positive side to anything. But if there's the universe is dualistic. It's hot. It's cold. It's dry. It's wet. It's all a bunch of opposites.
I mean, I named the nonprofit Need More Hope because I think hope is one of those things you lose when you're at the lowest.
Yeah, and psychiatry feeds that. There is no hope except coming to us and getting our meds and paying for it. Otherwise, you're going to be a complete lunatic. You're going to go to jail, or they're going to lock you up. So we got you.
And when you bring in, like we're talking about those prayers, and you start talking about Psalms 23, there's hope.
There's hope, especially when they see it work. When they see the voices don't like that. When they, my main thing was anything they don't like, give them more of it.
Right. Well, you're also not using. Your brain can't be in two emotions at once. You're not going to be hopeful or have gratitude and be in fear.
Right.
Those are not existing in your brain.
Right.
So it's one or the other. So if you can switch there, stay there.
Yeah, gratitude. I mean, just start thinking about all the things you have to be grateful for. I mean, look at some of these countries. These people are starving to death. They're freezing to death. Ukraine, they're being slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands. I mean, you got a warm bed and a place to live. You got food. I mean, there's a lot of things to be grateful for. They don't want you to do that. They don't want you to see that.
Oh yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest transitions, because it seems like all this really is the mental game.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, it's a mental spiritual game. This is spiritual warfare.
Yeah,
You know, you either take control of your attention and focus it on something productive, or they will, and they'll focus it on the garbage.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that right there is the best way to look at it, where it's either you're going to take care of it and you're going to be the one in charge, or they're going to have a great time controlling you for the rest of your life if you
Right.
don't own up.
And they'll keep edging toward more and more control until you lose control. You know, it's a battle either way. You know, you're going to be battling not to do what they say, or you're going to be battling to drive them back. You know,
Right.
because a lot of people know what you're telling me to do is going to get me in a lot of trouble. You know, but
Yeah.
they convince them to do it anyway, and then they get in a lot of trouble. And once they do that, that negative emotional energy just generates itself. You know, they don't have to work at it. It's like priming the pump. Once it catches on, they're just feeding it.
If I have, I'm sure I'm gonna have some people asking me. I'd love to refer people your way. Is on the private practice thing side of things. Is that something that you're open to new clients? And then
Oh
also,
yeah.
um, do you have a? Is there a certain time frame you want to make sure they work within? At least have you a couple months, or what?
Well,
How do I?
it depends. The Mace stuff is fairly quick. You know, it
Okay,
depends, and also they're going to need to do the work. I mean, it's not. They're going to have exercise. They're going to have homework. There's things they need to do. There'll be the Mace stuff on top of that, getting rid of the garbage that's in there. But yeah, they have to do the work. Nobody can do the work for them.
okay.
You know, I have a probably 2 or 3 week waiting list. Uh, but I'll eventually get them in, depending on how much free time they have. If I can reach them any time, then I can put them in some of these slots that are open.
Right.
But yeah, I don't see any more than 2 people a day because it drains me.
You were saying that in the book, and I absolutely could see that. It is an energy exchange in this life.
It
And
is
if
an
you're,
energy thing.
and when you're helping somebody, like I said, I've seen enough of my own little bit of helping that I get to do. It it's a beautiful thing, and it's inspiring, but it takes a lot from the person. So
Yeah.
and then your any feedback on the you said the Mace school in Australia? They have a class on that. I mean, obviously it's not gonna be for everybody because it's rather expensive, and then it's also having to go to Australia. Um, but have you had any feedback from that, or
Well, I've been working with them for
did you
a
have you
long
did
time.
you trained with them or
Yes.
help? Okay, and
Yeah.
would that
Yeah.
something you
And
suggest?
that's that's open. They're taking new students.
Okay,
But what's interesting is they took this method up to their legislature in Australia, and they showed them that it worked. And they just blew it off. They took it to one of the universities. They showed them it worked,
really.
and the university said, "You give us the copyright to it, and then we'll consider it."
I was always hopeful with Australia, but what they did with COVID down there and how
No,
the lockdown is just they're like the master plan and how much
yeah,
they're enforcing things and trying things out before they
yeah.
come here. I mean,
The only worst is New Zealand. They're making all their people take like 6 shots. I mean, they're really trying to knock off their population, but that's where all the dumbs are supposed to be, where all these big
that's
wigs have their underground bunkers over there.
I think that might be the big. They're trying to get rid of a lot of people there because I know a lot
Yeah,
of wealthy people in the states who bought property out in New Zealand, and that's where they want to end up. And so you start to see that there's these billionaires are out there. Well, you can't have a whole bunch of people there if you want to enjoy yourself. You're going to have to start
yeah.
eliminating some of that,
Well, that's why they took away their
or
guns too. I mean, they
or put them into cities that are small and the land are only for the rich.
where they can control the
Mhm.
population more.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's something I didn't bring up, but we only got a couple more minutes left. Is the anything with the veterans were on this one was the frequencies. Like I said, I've had guys that have been around towers that they were experimented on, and that turned them. Have you seen anything about this? The 5G or just being overloaded by EMF, things like that. That because they've had negative experiences. I'll just give this quick story that they were almost turned on them on each other because they were exposed to they were testing certain frequencies out on them, and they were actually responding like they all lost their mind.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it.
Okay.
The 5G and that's not good for you. It's not good for you. It's like being near a microwave oven all the time. And then they have that voice. I've had a number of people tell me about that. You know, voice to thought stuff, so
I've
they
heard
can
that as well.
broadcast stuff in your brain. That MK Ultra. I have a number of people that talked about that. I mean, they're doing some horrible things to people.
That's
And
also one of the problems, the hindrances I have with some of the guys knew about the voice to skull program, and they're like, oh, they're voice to sculling me, and I'm like, well, I mean, they could be, I don't know, but I said there's also might be another perspective, and then we talk about the voices.
yeah, yeah. Well, I have too many people tell me about that to ignore it. A lot of different people say, yeah, that this is what they're doing. Now, whether what kind of concerns me is if they get hold of these patterns and they start mimicking those patterns,
Wow.
it would completely mimic paranoid schizophrenia.
So the world
You know,
make a bunch of
yeah,
zombies.
yeah. So, But the other thing is not to release this information, and then they're going to go doing what they want anyway. You
Right.
know, so for the people who are trying to break free, yeah, go to my website and go to articles and read everything in that article section. And we're adding more material to it all the time. There's hundreds of videos there. It'll give you a good start as to what to do. Now, there's a bunch of other stuff you can do too. Um, but yeah, you can start on your own. That's a lie program. Realize these aren't you. These voices come from somewhere else. They're not good. They're parasites. They're toxic. They want to get you in trouble. Um, use the 23rd Psalm. Use the lie program. Ask your guardian angels for help. I mean, there's a lot of things you can start doing, but you got to realize that they aren't you to start with.
I'd love to end on that. That if there's dark voices out there, this is a
There's,
world of balance. There's good voices, and
there are.
there's guardian angel. I used to. That's
They speak
so we
mostly in
just need we
feelings
need to
and
have both
intuition.
sides of this story.
Yeah, the good side usually speaks in feeling and intuition, unless
Right.
you're on the verge of death. Then they'll say something. But yeah, they're there. They're waiting for you to ask for help. They can't. The guardian angels are not allowed to help you unless you ask. They can't interfere with your free will.
Right.
So once you give them permission to help, then they can come in and do what they can. But you don't ask them; they're not allowed. And believe me, working in the ER, I've worked with people that should have been dead 10 times over, over and over and over again. And here's this lady got hit by 2 trains. I mean, her car got hit by 2 trains. She comes into the ER with a black eye. That's it. She should have been
Wow.
smashed. They had to cut her
Wow.
out of that car. And the car was a crumpled tin can. They had to cut her out. A black eye. She's thrown 50 yards off the side of the railroad track after being hit by a second train. Another one came in with a pistol. She put it to her chest, fired it. The bullet went right through it. Didn't hit any organs. It didn't hit any. Uh, it just missed everything. It came out the other side, went into the wall. Here she is in front of me, with 2 big band-aids on. I'm like, thing after thing after thing like that, where they should have never survived. And the lady in the train, she was. I asked her what were you thinking when you came to and you saw you were alive? She said, I was furious. I was absolutely furious. I didn't want to be here. And then she said she heard a voice that said, everything's going to be all right. She just felt this feeling of calm just pour through her. And after that, she was okay.
Wow. Well, Jerry, this has been an amazing time, and I'm hoping we can get this out to as many people as possible. And like I said, I think you're bringing a hope into this world that we've needed for a long time, and you're exposing things that are, I mean, just absolutely life changing.
Well,
And I thank you for it.
if I hadn't experienced it myself, I probably wouldn't even believe it. Like I said, I denied it for years until it got to the point where these voices were starting to they were talking to me through the patient, and then they were starting to make weird things happen, which were real scary. And yeah, I couldn't deny it anymore. It was like it just became very real. You know.
Well, like I know it's very real for a lot of people, and the fact that there's an actual game plan, that there's tools that are out there to help, and we're seeing real results. I don't think there's anything better you could offer somebody. It's just a chance, just a hope.
Well, they can go to my website at jerrymarzinski.com. There's a lot of information there. Read the articles section, read the blog section, watch the videos. You can sign up for a therapy session there. Maybe a little bit of a waiting time, but eventually I'll get you in.